Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. What a wonderful crowd it is. Friends, old friends, new friends, especially old friends. Of course, everybody to me is a young friend. I should put it this way. All right. This is a celebration of religious freedom. Every year we gather to celebrate religious freedom by honoring someone who has defended it heroically because of his own or her own religious views for everyone, everywhere. And this year that man is Alan Sears, founder and for 23 years, president of Alliance Defending Freedom. You'll hear more about our deep admiration for Alan, and Paula is with him tonight. We're so grateful for both of them. So join me again. We're also here to celebrate America's commitment, long-standing commitment to religious freedom. That commitment and its contribution to the most successful democracy in the world is unprecedented in the history of mankind and unmatched in the history of nations. Indeed, America's model of religious freedom is a light to the nations. And if we permit that light to dim in this blessed land, the world will be a darker place. Belief in the American model is the starting point for the Religious Freedom Institute. Let me tell you a little bit of our story. Just sit back and relax. No, it won't be. RFI began in 2010 at Georgetown University. Back then, we were called the Religious Freedom Project. Our work at the time was mainly scholarly, and our primary focus was overseas. We funded scholars to research the essence of religious freedom and how its absence harms not only religious minorities who are persecuted, but entire societies and international security. We produced a huge body of work, books, articles, congressional testimony, conferences around the world, and the like. But in those same years, we began to observe that religious freedom was under growing pressure in the United States. Our form of democracy has been a beacon to the world in many ways, but none more important than its centerpiece, our founders' model of religious freedom for everyone. While never perfect, that model has generated the most compassionate and dynamic civil society in history. It supported our political system of limited government and a society in which people with deep and abiding differences have been able to live together in peace as one nation. So in 2016, we founded the Religious Freedom Institute. We left Georgetown and began to integrate our international and domestic strategies. Today, RFI teams do highly effective work in the Middle East, in Asia, Africa, and Europe, but over half our resources are now focused on preserving the American model in America. We teach our kids, K through graduate school, our young professionals, our corporate and religious leaders, our teachers and professors, and especially our political elites, why religious freedom for everyone must be defended in America. So what motivates us to do this work? Our staff at RFI is religiously diverse, but each of us believes, with America's founders, that God gives every human being certain unalienable rights, including the right to life and the right to religious freedom. For me personally, this idea comes together in the Bible and our country's founders. They both teach that God gives us freedom to discover and live the truth, to exercise our religion, as the First Amendment puts it. As I see it, we will be truly happy only if we use our freedom to serve God, to obey His commandments, and to love our neighbor for love of Him. This view of freedom means that politics is penultimate. For me, it means that no political allegiance can supersede my allegiance to God. So to sum up, RFI champions a model of religious freedom that is deeply rooted in the American tradition, is embraced by faithful American Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and many others. And of critical importance, this model encompasses every human being of every religion or no religion and every nation. But ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. We have a big problem. The American model of religious freedom is under attack in America. Political and cultural elites have decided either that religion should play no part in our public life, or that particular religious convictions that have played a central role in our history should now be eliminated from our public life. Those convictions include the sacredness of every human life, the beautiful natural distinctions between men and women and boys and girls, and marriage as the union of one man and one woman who, as parents, are the primary educators and protectors of their children, not the state. Today, those who refuse to abandon those beliefs are being cast as haters and bigots. Like despicable racists, they should be driven from our public life, according to some. But the millions of Americans who hold those beliefs are not haters and bigots, they're lovers. Most of them love their country and their neighbors. You'll find them on the front lines of every humanitarian cause, from fighting sex trafficking to feeding the poorest of the poor. Most of them love their neighbors enough to serve even those who despise them. However imperfectly, they strive to live St. Paul's challenge, and I quote, to regard others as more important than yourselves, unquote. We need that love more than ever in America. As you doubtless have noticed, Americans have become more intolerant and more violent. Traditional religious citizens who protect marriage and the family and who love others because they love God should be applauded, not reviled. In fact, our democracy depends on it. Let me say that again. This attack on religious freedom is an attack not just on religious Americans, but it's an attack on American democracy. It's the vanguard of an authoritarian ideology which, like authoritarians the world over, cannot abide citizens who are faithful to something or someone greater than the state. This dangerous ideology is not only present in our politics, it's in our schools, it's in the media, it's in corporate America. RFI defends the rights of all people to hold religious views, as long as those views are nonviolent and do not employ the coercive powers of the state. We support in particular those who promote marriage and the family, parental rights and responsibilities, self-giving and unity, because we believe with the founders that these views are a necessary part of America and of American pluralism. If we allow those who hold these views to be banned, to be canceled, we're harming ourselves, our country, and a world which looks to America for leadership on religious freedom and democracy. So what is RFI doing to fight this scourge, this threat to America and the world? Well, for one thing, we speak for religious freedom, about religious freedom here in this country and around the world. This year alone, we trained over 7,000 students at home and abroad on the meaning and value of religious freedom for their societies. We're educating the Congress and the American public on the harms of the so-called terribly named Respect for Marriage Act and the even worse named Equality Act. Both of them would threaten and punish Americans with traditional religious views. We're fighting alongside ADF and Christ Medicus to protect America's healthcare system by defending the religious rights of healthcare professionals, patients, and the parents of minors who need health care. We've helped pass 3 state laws, and more successes are on the horizon. We have this fall launched an online course on religion and public virtue. When did you hear that phrase last? Public virtue. So far, we've got dozens of students from 15 different universities signed up and enrolled. We're marketing a new curriculum for high schools on America's First Freedom, which is being distributed around the country in print and digital format, and has, very importantly, being distributed to public schools, and we are proud to say it's already been picked up by a public school district in Tennessee. We've developed crisis toolkits that prepare faith-based organizations for the assaults that are coming and to deal with those that are already here. And we published a hard-hitting assessment of the mounting criminal attacks, you don't read a lot about this, against houses of worship and pregnancy resource centers in America. We have many of these products and others here for you to take home, and I'd love to hear your views of any of them. Just contact any member of our staff, or please contact me. I want to hear your views. So let me sum up. That's an applause line. No sense of humor. Our guiding principle at RFI is that the founders were right. When's the last time you heard that? Religious freedom comes from God. It is utterly necessary for the flourishing of every human being and the success of every society. We adapt that model to very different societies around the world, but we begin here at home, where the model was born, where it has anchored the greatest nation in history, and where its demise would indeed darken the world. We do it with empirical evidence and with decades of on-the-ground experience. We do it with faith and reason and hope, and yes, with love. And we do it successfully. Each of us at RFI is grateful to God for the privilege of fighting in this fight with the many partners represented in this room tonight. And we're grateful to each of you for supporting the sacred cause of religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. Now, before I turn to Scott Redd to offer a prayer, let me take the opportunity to acknowledge the presence of one of my daughters. Natalie Farr was going to be here with us tonight, but she couldn't make it. But Kara Cook and her husband Dave are here tonight, and I want to tell you I am grateful to God for them. I told them they didn't have to stand up, so they're back there somewhere. Scott Redd, Dr. Scott Redd, is the president of the Reformed Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., and I'm proud to say a senior fellow at RFI. Scott, please come up and bless this gathering and our meal.
Good evening. Please bow your heads and join me in prayer. O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Great you are, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great is your power. Your wisdom is infinite. We could praise you without ceasing because you are true God. You call us to delight in your praise, in your character, and in the world that you have made. You have made us for yourself, and our hearts find no rest until we find our rest in you. Lord, we pray that we might find that rest. You are indeed a God of liberty, a God who desires our sincere faith, whether in the earnest prayer of the believing child or the scrutinized faith of the adult convert. You are a God of freedom, a God of life, a God of flourishing, the flourishing of humanity who is made in your image, and whoever forever points back your self-generated glory to you. We give thanks this night. We give thanks for this sustenance, for this food, to break bread together. And we give thanks for the fellowship that we have with others committed to the liberty that you have designed us for. We give this night to you and to your glory. In your matchless name we pray. Amen. Bon appetit.
Why is religious freedom important for everyone, everywhere? Because every human being must be free to be religious, to determine whether there is a greater than human source of existence, of ultimate meaning, of happiness in this life and the next. To deny any human being the freedom to conduct the search and to live in accord with the truths he or she discovers is to attack the very core of what it means to be human. Religious freedom isn't a privilege granted by government. It's a natural right given to each of us by God. And yet millions of our fellow human beings remain subject to violent persecution or to invidious discrimination simply because of their faith. We must fight for these people, all of them. For the Uyghur Muslims in China, for the Christians of Nigeria, for the Jews of Europe and North America, for the traditional religious believers right here at home who hold to ancient truths on the sacredness of human life, on marriage, family, and sexuality. At the Religious Freedom Institute, that's exactly what we do. We fight for the millions around the world who are oppressed for their peaceful religious beliefs and practices. We do it at the highest levels of power, and we do it on the ground. We teach the young the meaning and value of religious freedom for themselves and for their nations. We teach future American leaders to defend and exercise the religious freedom given to each of them by God and by our Constitution. We help parents regain their rightful authority over their children's education and their children's moral formation. We ensure doctors and nurses can care for their patients according to their best medical judgment and their deepest convictions. We defend the rights of religious organizations to exercise their religion in private, but also in public, and to make their extraordinary contributions to our public life in America. And we partner with the most effective religious freedom defenders around the world. Because religious freedom lies at the heart of what it means to be human. Because a society that affords all of its citizens religious freedom generates good things for everyone. Join RFI in advancing the cause of universal human dignity and its best, most humane, and most powerful defense, religious freedom for everyone, everywhere.
I'd like to welcome all of you tonight, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Anthony Niles, and I'm the Director of Development here at the Religious Freedom Institute. I want to extend a special thanks to all of our legacy sponsors that have made tonight possible. Mike and Larry Blandford, thank you. Lynn and Larry Blandford, Doug and Cheryl Beck, Susan and Celia Yates, ADF, CRC Advisors, EWTN, Solidarity Healthcare, Everwell, and Alice Starr and the late Honorable Ken Starr. I'd like to now introduce David Tremble, our Director for the National Center for Religious Freedom Education.
Good evening. Seated in coach on a commercial flight is not a great place to meet anyone. We'd met just moments before, as we stood at the gate at Reagan National, looking up at the list of upgrades with despairing hope. I turned around because I heard two disgruntled individuals late on a Friday afternoon commiserating over the fact that their fate was going to be like mine. We were stuck in the back. When I turned around, saw a gentleman in a gray suit, a green tie, and a Baylor baseball cap. I introduced myself to those two individuals. Said, looks like we share the same fate. And when I introduced myself to Ken Starr, I said, well, Ken, Baylor has quite a bit of my money. My oldest daughter went there. Perhaps, providentially, we were meant to be seated across the aisle from each other late that Friday afternoon. Ken had just returned from a religious freedom conference. If you know Ken, you can imagine that he told me a lot about that conference as we flew back to Fort Worth. Shared with him a little bit about my work, higher education, having done some work in theology and law and some in religious freedom. Well, 4 months later, I was representing Baylor's interest in D.C. Now, represented their interest on a number of educational issues, but mostly religious freedom. Very soon after that meeting on the plane, and starting with Baylor, Ken introduced me, Tom Farr. All of that within about 4 months. And I began collaborating with RFI more than any other organization in D.C. Like many of you here tonight, Ken quickly became my mentor, my colleague, my friend. We walked the halls of Congress together, more than either of us would probably like to say. Had many meetings with members of Congress. I know during those years, I would always often send Ken an email or call and say, Ken, I think you need to come to D.C. We've hit a block. Maybe it was on the Frank Wolf amendments to the Religious Freedom Act. Maybe it was on H.R. 390, the Iraq and Syria Genocide and Relief Accountability Act. And say, Ken, I need you here in D.C. Sure enough, he'd be here. Sometimes Alice was in the background on those calls saying, are you sure you need to make another trip to D.C.? We worked together. We advanced initiatives to support higher education, Baylor students. And we frequently talked about and watched America's favorite pastime, baseball. Remember on one occasion, I was often going to the Nationals games. My family weren't in town. I'd just go over and watch the baseball. But if you went to watch baseball with Ken and Alice, you went to Baltimore. Never quite figured that out, but had to go see the Orioles. It would really be impossible to overstate Ken's impact on the Religious Freedom Institute. He was there at the beginning. He was really the one that brought the oldest Catholic university in America together with the largest Baptist university. I dare say not many individuals could have done that. It'd be hard to overstate his impact on RFI. The same could be said for our National Center for Religious Freedom Education. The center's resources and programs are fundamentally based in the rule of law. We are passionate about education. We are devoted to defending religious freedom. Ken, in his life and work, embodied these fundamental principles of American democracy. To many of you in this room tonight, Ken was also mentor, colleague, and friend. Many of you in different capacities. Please join me this evening as we share a short video tribute to Judge Ken Starr. Thank you.
Many of us, as we're gathered here today, think of our personal relationship with Ken Starr. I think everybody in the room has known him to some degree or another. And as I said to a friend just last night, I said, anyone who has known Ken during these past 5, 10, 20 years, each year we get to think more and more highly of him. The more you know him, the more highly you think of him.
It was John Locke who gave a bouquet to Baptists for fighting the cause of religious freedom and really freedom of the mind, which is so important in the academic world. It's really freedom of conscience. It is a profound respect for the dignity of each human being.
The freedom of religion, both not simply to believe but to act, is entirely consistent with human flourishing, and the failure to provide a regime of religious liberty results in human impoverishment.
No one is to be above the law, and why is that? Because each person has his or her bedrock freedoms, and those bedrock freedoms must be respected even by governmental authority.
When one turns to the First Amendment, one sees religious liberty lifted up as the first of the first freedoms.
What is beautiful about RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is that Congress has spoken with enormous unanimity and supported by President Clinton saying, government, please respect these religious views. No matter how important the public policy is, it's got to be a policy of the very highest order. The Supreme Court is more frequently than not the friend of religious liberty. I've always been a person of faith, fallen though I am. As James says in chapter 3, we stumble in so many ways. But I've always cared deeply about faith and the ability of all persons to live out their lives consistent with their faith journey.
We have learned to our sorrow of the woe that befalls us as a country when rules are flouted and process is torn asunder. We see what happens when a system of ordered liberty is compromised, and the injury is to the entire body politic.
But these fundamental values and premises are under assault. We need to recapture the goodness of America and articulate it.
When the book is written on the great baby boomer generation, as it passes from this mortal coil perhaps 40 or 50 years from now, that generation's book will be hard-pressed to find a more nobler or more honorable man than Ken Starr.
Alice, thank you for being here. I have nothing that I can add more meaningful than what David said, except perhaps to reaffirm how important he was to this organization. He was my mentor and my friend and a hero to all of us. So thank you all for joining us in this tribute to our friend and mentor, Ken Starr. Alice, I hope you won't mind if I say if he were here, he would say, please. Thank you. Okay, here's something else Judge Starr would say. Could we please have the wine? And bon appetit.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nathan Berkeley, and I have the distinct privilege to serve as RFI's Communications Director. We intended our next presenter this evening to be Mary Rice Hassan, who serves as Vice Chair of RFI's Board of Directors, and she's a dear friend of RFI in so many different ways. Regrettably, Mary cannot be here this evening. She is with her husband, Seamus, whom many of you know as a leading figure in the religious freedom field, to say the least, to say the very least. Seamus was admitted to the hospital a few days ago. I'm happy to report that I believe he has returned home, and Mary is with him now. And the Hassans, of course, would welcome your prayers during this time. Now, I'm delighted. Yes, it's wonderful news. I'm delighted to introduce our next presenter, my colleague and RFI's Deputy Communications Director, Katie Davern, to introduce and present the RFI Impact Award. Katie.
Good evening. Until about a year ago, I worked as a speechwriter for a U.S. Senator. And while that was a wonderful opportunity, I am grateful to now be a part of RFI's work of advancing religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. It is now my honor to present RFI's inaugural Religious Freedom Impact Award. The Impact Award is given to an individual who has demonstrated consistent, effective, and innovative leadership in advancing religious freedom. This year's recipient is Dr. Andrew Kubik. Dr. Kubik is an expert on bioethics and chairs the one-of-a-kind Department of Bioethics at St. John Paul the Great Catholic High School in Dumfries, Virginia. As a research fellow with RFI's National Center for Religious Freedom Education, he has helped author our America's First Freedom curriculum for high school students. He has also published a number of works on religious freedom and bioethics as part of the joint initiative led by RFI, Christ Medicus, and ADF to protect the conscience rights of medical professionals. Dr. Kubik will represent RFI at 8 education conferences over the next year, bringing our research and curricula to teachers, parents, and university faculty across the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in honoring Dr. Andrew Kubik.
Thank you. I have to add that Andrew he's a wonderful teacher. He has made it through teaching 3 of my grandchildren, if you can believe that. John Paul the Great High School is, as far as I know, only one of 2 institutions, a high school in the whole world that has a 5-course mandatory bioethics curriculum. So every kid that goes through that high school takes 5 courses on bioethics, and he is the chair of that group, and we're very proud of him. So thank you, Andrew. So before I introduce my friend John Stonestreet, who will present tonight's award to Alan Sears, let me just say a word about this award and a personal word, if I might, about Alan. This award is given annually by the Religious Freedom Institute to a religious leader who defends religious freedom for everyone, not in spite of, but because of his or her own religious beliefs. No one fills that criterion better than Alan Sears. Anyone in the religious freedom world knows what a giant he is, as do countless people who won their cases because of the organization he founded, Alliance Defending Freedom. ADF, by the way, is richly represented here tonight, not only a whole group of their wonderful attorneys, but we have with us Alan's successor, Mike Ferris. Mike, thank you so much for being here tonight. And the newly minted president of Alliance Defending Freedom, the redoubtable Kristen Wagner. Alan's work and his legacy have made a difference in the lives of many people, and I'm sure many people in this room, but certainly many people in this country and around the world. Let me tell you very briefly how he made a difference in mine. Years ago, when Alan was very ill and in danger of death, I sent him a note. His daughter, Rebecca, now Rebecca Sears Holdenreed, who is here with her husband, Josh. That's her mother, Rebecca. Rebecca sent me an answer to my note to her father. "Tell Tom I love him," she wrote. I was, of course, deeply moved. One of my heroes was telling me goodbye, or so I thought, in the most powerful way possible. But God had other plans for Alan Sears. And here he is, years later, doing what he always does, inspiring others by the grace of God. Alan, my brother, I love you too. With that, let me introduce, if I might, another one of my heroes. Now, can you have heroes that are the same age as your children? Well, the answer is apparently yes. Because, the children that I have here tonight are approximately the same age as John Stonestreet. So I'm proof that you can. John Stonestreet is, to put it bluntly, the successor of Chuck Colson. Like Colson was for many years, John is today a powerful Christian voice of faith, of hope, of love, and of reason. I can't think of any virtues more important for this moment than those. John is president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview and the daily voice of Breakpoint, the nationally syndicated commentary on the culture founded by Chuck Colson. Please welcome to the stage my friend, John Stonestreet.
Wow, thank you very much. Tom, I don't know how old your children are, but I'm 72. I've just aged rather well. And of course, it just needs to be said, there's no such thing as filling Chuck Colson's shoes. That just is not a possibility. But tonight we join with all of you. There's a line that Chuck used to love. He said, he was quoting Isaac Newton, I believe, "If I've seen further than most, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants." Chuck was one of those giants. Tom, you're one of those giants. And Alan Sears is one of those giants. And there's so many others in the room, and it's such an honor to be a part of this tonight. You know, I often wonder what William Wilberforce was thinking in 1797. That was 10 years after he became the leader of the abolitionists in Parliament. Or what he was thinking in 1799, 12 years after he started this campaign, as he would put it later, for the abolition of the slave trade and the reformation of manners. Or maybe the year 1802, 15 years after. You know, if any of us were presented with a cause, with a fight that we knew would be successful in 20 years, we would jump on immediately. But that's the thing, isn't it? You don't know going in that you're going to be successful. You don't know that you're going to win or you're going to lose. You don't know if you're going to get beaten or if you're going to put the opponent down. It's just impossible to know. In 1993, a group of Christian leaders came together and approached Alan Sears about founding an organization, one that would show up to represent Christians in the public square, people of faith as well, an organization that would stand up in defense of the unborn, in defense of marriage as an institution, and especially in defense of religious liberty, through strategy, through training, and through legal advocacy. When they approached Alan, his response to them was, "Are we here to win?" Their answer was yes. And so Alan took up this cause. By the way, they also said that he wouldn't have to raise any money, but that didn't come true. Alan led the Alliance Defending Freedom for the first 24 years of its existence. It's now the world's largest law firm dedicated to protecting religious liberty, free speech, the sanctity of life, parental rights, and marriage in the family. Because free speech is for everyone, ADF advocates for the rights of all Americans to say what they believe without fear of government punishment. So far, ADF has won nearly 80% of its cases. Since 2011, 14 wins at the United States Supreme Court. It's a remarkable organization, and many of us have had the privilege to be associated with it in so many different ways. But starting out in 1993 with very little funding, it was impossible to see at that point what ADF would or could become. That they would be instrumental under Alan's leadership, not only in defending but in advancing both the idea of religious freedom and religious freedom protections for real people across the United States and around the world. So much so that 24 years later, in 2017, Politico magazine named Alan among the top 50 thinkers, doers, and visionaries transforming American politics. I can imagine they probably named him that with some chagrin. Now, for those keeping track at home, that was 24 years into his journey in leading ADF. It was the same year that he would step down and hand the reins over to Mike Ferris, and it was also just 2 years after the Supreme Court issued a decision in a case called Obergefell versus Hodges, which many people, myself included, thought would be the beginning of the end of the kind of religious freedom that ADF had stood for and fought for, and the kind of protections that Americans had long enjoyed. And see, that's the thing about Alan's career. It was done in faith, in service of a cause bigger than himself, worthy of his life, his talents, his calling. It's been the kind of life and career that was described by Friedrich Nietzsche as a long obedience in the same direction. Described in Holy Scripture as faithful and fruitful. As Kierkegaard told us, life has to be lived forward, and it's only understood backwards. Today, looking back, we can thank God for his servant, Alan Sears, for the vision that God gave him, and for the wife that he gave him, too. for the strength that God gave Alan day in and day out to move forward. And of course, we thank him for his mercy in granting him a reprieve from these health challenges late in these last few years. Alan Sears' tenacity mirrors that of William Wilberforce. For more than 2 decades, Wilberforce faced bitter and powerful opposition to his work to end the slave trade. But he never gave up. He never quit. He never lost what Abraham Lincoln once called faith in a vast future. Alan lives that way too, with the future in mind, and it's a vast one. In a Breakpoint commentary years ago, Chuck Colson told of a tired and weary William Wilberforce sitting in his chair studying his Bible when an old letter that he had saved fluttered from between its pages. It was written by none other than the great Christian evangelist John Wesley. Here's what Wesley wrote. Unless God has raised you up for this very thing, you will be worn out by the opposition of men and of devils. But if God be for you, who can be against you? Are all of them together stronger than God? Oh, be not weary of well-doing. Before founding the Alliance Defending Freedom and serving as its founder, CEO, and general counsel, Alan served under President Reagan and President George H.W. Bush in their administrations, first as federal prosecutor, then as chief of the criminal section in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Kentucky. But he was also asked to lead the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography in the Reagan administration. The commission's recommendation under Alan's leadership went to Congress and were adopted by the U.S. Senate with a 96-0 vote and then signed into law. So much of that experience dealing with what was at the time a great moral scourge on the nation, the growth and expansion of pornography. So much of that experience shaped how Alan would continue to lead, working across the aisle, facing incredible opposition and anger, staring down some of the worst ideas about human nature and behavior, while still seeking to care for and to protect the victim of those bad ideas. It prepared him in a powerful way to found and to build Alliance Defending Freedom and to launch its various programs and initiatives, which are almost too many to actually list here, from ADF International, ADF Foundation, the ADF Legal Academy, the Summit, Blackstone Fellows, the Center for Academic Freedom, Pulpit Freedom Sunday, and on and on and on. Alan, of course, is now retired, which to Alan seems to mean something completely different than it does to most people. He continues to serve an incredible amount of people, causes, and organizations and foundations, and he mentors first-time CEOs now as executive director of the Kingdom Alliance Builders, equipping them to succeed and to expand their work. And by the way, what I mean by equipping them, I mean us. I have the privilege of being one of those that has been mentored and cared for and instructed by Alan Sears. Alan has been incredibly kind to me personally, not just in these last few years, but even before, as I first had the privilege of working with the Alliance Defending Freedom in various contexts. I've learned so much, Alan, from watching you lead, listening to you wrestle with ideas and situations, and watching you love and serve others, including your family. And I want to say thank you personally. In reality, however, it's not just what Alan has accomplished, what he has done for the cause of religious liberty and conscience rights that really needs to be mentioned and recognized tonight. It's also how he has done it. Because he has done it right by taking on what I'll call an others-focused posture. Alan once said that those who act alone rarely succeed. And Alan has exemplified and taught me about what it means to involve others in so many different ways. First of all, Alan has taken a posture of learning from others. Even after his formal education at the University of Kentucky and Brandeis School of Law, Alan has remained a curious person, committed to ongoing learning and personal formation about leadership, about business, about law, about theology. That posture of curiosity is a way that Alan is actually expresses his humility and learning from others. And of course, he's also a student of history, which can be seen in his excellent book on President Eisenhower. He took a posture of learning from others. He also took a posture of serving with others. It's just been amazing over the years to watch the team at ADF just get better and better and better and better and better. And now even continued after the leadership baton has passed. Building alliances, including unexpected alliances across partisan lines, across faith lines, across denominational lines. And in all of this, Alan has been committed to his own maxim, which he has shared with many, and if you've been around him, you've probably heard him say it, that one of the things he tries to do, and I think he's done, is to make stars of others. He also took a posture of working for others, for victims of government overreach, for victims of the sexual revolution, for people of all faiths through the mission of ADF. Though the mission of ADF was articulated by Bill Bright as to keep the door open for the spread of the gospel, Alan built his work around that belief, but also the belief, as he put it, that nothing is more important than being able to shape your own conscience and live according to that conscience. Alan's work would have never succeeded if he had not first grasped what is true, what is really true about people, who they are. In fact, I'd suggest that any work done in the realm of religious liberty, either advancing it or defending it, won't work if it devolves into a defense of someone's own special interest. What it has to do is be clear on three things. First, that our value as human beings is based on who we are, not what we do. It's intrinsic, it's inherent, it's not external, it's not constructed. It's based in the fact that every single human being is made in the image and likeness of God. We have to be clear that our rights as human beings are granted by God, not by the state. A just state is one that recognizes those rights, but also recognizes that only God can grant them. And we have to be clear on what fundamentally motivates human beings. And that is their faith, their deeply held beliefs. We're not economically determined creatures. We're not socially constructed beings. We are believers. We are lovers. We are worshipers. And that is something that has to be done freely. In his book on President Eisenhower, Alan included this quote from President Eisenhower: "Faith is the mightiest force that man has at his command. It impels human beings to greatness in thought and word and deed." It's also, by the way, why faith is so dangerous to tyrants, so feared by those who think that the state is the highest authority, who think that only government can order society and human life and ensure the human good. They're wrong, of course, but they're right in seeing faith as their greatest enemy, because faith is. Alan also took a posture of calling and inspiring others to act, and that's really why we're here tonight. Early on, by the way, Alan realized just how important education would be to the cause of religious freedom. Because what we're dealing with right now is a culture that not only is rejecting religious freedom in so many ways, attacking religious freedom in so many ways, but just actually doesn't get what religious freedom is all about in the first place. So to define religious freedom is an essential task of its defense. To define religious freedom. After all, it was just in 2016 where the chairman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights called religious freedom, quote, code words for discrimination, intolerance, racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and Christian supremacy. Now, for many younger Americans, religious freedom just means a license to discriminate, to be a bigot. Not a net positive, not even something good, but a net negative. But religious freedom is an essential idea, and it has to be defined in order to be defended. It's not merely the right to believe, it's the right to act. It's not limited to believing what we want in our own heads, in our own hearts, homes, or even houses of worship. It certainly is that, but it's so much more. Religious freedom is the right to order our public lives according to our deeply held beliefs. And when religious freedom is protected, the other freedoms flourish. That's why the educational work of the Alliance Defending Freedom under Alan's leadership was so strategic. It's going to be hard ever to quantify the incredible impact that the Blackstone Fellowship has had on this country. And that all came from a napkin, didn't it, Alan? That was sketched out on a napkin. It's also why, by the way, the educational work that we heard about earlier this evening from RFI is so important right now. We need good law. We need better legal protections, but we need people to understand what religious freedom is and why it is so important. Today, through Kingdom Alliance Builders, I'm the beneficiary of an education from Alan Sears through mentoring on how to lead others, how to keep that vision of a vast future in front of me. And it's been an incredible asset to my life and to my ministry. And I thank you, Alan, again. The final posture that Alan took is a posture of relying on others. Of course, for years he's relied on his beautiful wife, Paula. And their ministry together has been unbelievable. His lovely and expanding family. But first and foremost, and if you've ever been around Alan for just a few moments, you'll know that his life verse is John 15:5, in which Jesus said, "Without me, you can do nothing." And he's relied on Jesus for the success and the leadership that he has shown. And we've all been blessed because of it. Thank you, Alan, for your courage, for your leadership, for your kindness to me, for your friendship, for giving us a vision of a vast future, for pointing the way there. And I'd like to invite Tom Farr back up to the stage and my friend Alan Sears to receive the RFI Defender of Religious Freedom Award.
The first question that you ask after somebody does an introduction like that is, what do I have to say? Because as President Reagan used to say when you get a very generous introduction, is maybe it's time to just pack up and go home because it's not going to be uphill from here. But I want to thank you, John, for your love, your kindness, your friendship. I want to thank all the members and supporters of the Institute, and my dear brothers and sisters of goodwill, common purpose, and faith. And John let the secret out that Paul is really the founder of Alliance Defending Freedom. I was the front man. And then my family, who I'm so grateful for. All of the children participated so much. Ask them sometime about their 14 summers in the Hamptons, where they spent literally their entire summer in a car or a van or a Suburban, and learned about everything that could be wrong with a hotel with a carbohydrate and sugar breakfast. But they were listed as free. And Tom Farr. Tom, I am so thankful for the Religious Freedom Institute, for your unwavering commitment all of these years of working to secure religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, increasingly everywhere. You've saved lives. You've protected souls. You've preserved human dignity on so many fronts. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And all of you heard Tom talk about the curriculum John mentioned. I commend much of what they're doing to everyone in this room and to those you communicate with, because I don't think any of us can know too much about the methodology and the words and the messaging, all the other things that we must do to defend and win. And I just saw Frank Wolf here. I mean, I don't know what to do. I'm looking out in this audience, and here's all the people that should be standing here besides me. You incredible heroes and friends. Thank you for all you've done through the years. But you know, tonight, as John alluded to, we, and as Tom said earlier, we live in days of profound political upheaval, of surging social turbulence, of churning emotion and growing violence, of steadily deepening anger and contempt for God and for the rule of law. But I'm thankful to be here, because looking around this room tonight, we're reminded that many refuse to bow to that intimidation or to remain silent in the face of that abuse. We hold to the faith of our fathers. We stand on the deepest convictions of our souls. I'm reminded of a story that John Stonestreet shared at an ADF event some years ago. John made the observation that at night, when we're safe, we're secure in our well-lit homes, and we suddenly remember we left something in our car out in the driveway. We open the door to step outside. We find an interesting phenomenon.
Darkness does not flood into the room and the open door to plunge us into darkness. Instead, the light from inside pierces the darkness, casting its illumination onto the shadowy things outside. It's that way, John explained, with the light of God that shines within each of us. When we confront the darkness, we are not overpowered. Instead, God's light flows from us to pierce the darkness and the evil around us. And we all know it is a dark world out there, growing darker by the hour. But we don't huddle in here, crouched and trembling around our little candles. We draw courage from our faith, and we lift our light to shine truth and love and hope into that darkness. And we lift up and we support one another. Each of us comes to this room tonight from our own cherished faith traditions. You must know that I'm a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ. I find my purpose in freedom in Him. But that faith does not just inform my own religious views and sensibilities. It also informs my passion for others to find their own hope and freedom and purpose of life. I cannot speak from my own beliefs and from my Christian perspective, but we do not have to share each other's faith, to share a commitment to secure for all people of all faiths the freedom to worship in the way they choose. And that is why I'm so thankful that you invited me here tonight. What a humbling, overwhelming honor to be invited to stand at the same dais where 3 more distinguished persons have stood in recent years to receive this same award. I can't say enough about each of these people, the respect and appreciation I have for these extraordinary leaders. It wasn't so long ago that His Excellency, the Archbishop Charles Chaput, stood with Paul and I at the shrine of St. Peregrine to pray that I would be healed of stage 4 cancer. I'm indebted to him for that kind intercession, and for so many of you in this room tonight. Thank you for your prayers and God's grace. I've been granted a few more days to serve Him in His kingdom. As many of you know, the Archbishop is the author of Render Unto Caesar, a volume we designated as required reading for a generation of lawyers at Alliance Defending Freedom. Around that rare volume, RFI's president, Tom Farr, said, at the core of his teaching on religious freedom is the understanding that if we're not able to live our lives according to our religious convictions, none of us can be said to be living a fully human life. Russell Moore, who was here next, served as president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention during the years I was blessed and pleased to be at ADF. I had the great privilege of working with Russell on many religious freedom issues. And then most recently, and Kristen Wagner was here to introduce him, Carl Anderson understands the meaning of forgotten country. He served as a member of that U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and for 20 years he was the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus. Now, I'm not sure how I came to stand in such remarkable company, but I humbly accept this award, Tom, in the name of and on behalf of the ADF team and all of those who have stood in these recent years for the defense of religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. We bring many points of view and perspectives to these tables tonight. We could probably fill the room with lively debate on a lot of religious theological issues. But in the end, I don't think we would find much disagreement on what needs to be done in these difficult days by people of character and those who are called to live by faith. But I would respectfully suggest that now and in the crowded days ahead, knowing what we need to do and even doing what we need to do will not be enough. As was alluded to, for the way and the how of what we do is as important to God as what we do. I want to show you a photograph. This is a picture of President Ronald Reagan with Romak and Wanda Spasowski. Romak was a leading Polish diplomat. He was an ambassador to the United States. In December 1981, as the Polish resistance to communist tyranny grew, which was encouraged, of course, by the earlier election of John Paul II as Pope and his appearances throughout that land. Romack became the highest-ranking communist official to ever defect to the West. It was a courageous but very dangerous decision. His property, his citizenship was revoked, and he was condemned to death. When President Reagan met with the Spisowskis at the White House hours after their defection, he sensed their nervousness, their worries about what would come next. As he walked them out to the car that was waiting to take them to their new home, as you see, he personally held the umbrella over them and put a supportive arm of comfort around Wanda. This is how, the way, President Reagan opened his arms to persons who days before were his opponents. Those who had represented a hostile regime that, in league with the Soviet Union, was terribly oppressing the Polish people. What we see in this photograph depicts what we call grace. These are not the actions of a politician or even of a world leader. These are the actions of a kind man, a friend. And I can't help thinking, for all the assurances of protection that couple had received, this was the moment they knew they were really safe. The gentle gesture was the moment they knew they had made the right decision. And speaking of grace, it was just a few years later that Romack was baptized, became a full member of the church, and became a daily communicant. You know, when I was asked to launch and to be the founding president of Alliance Defending Freedom, which then was just a mere dream, a concept to develop, I understood my mission. It was to create the capacity to respond to opportunity, to lay an enduring groundwork for a long-term struggle for religious liberty, a foundation for victory, and for us as Christians to keep the legal door open to live out the gospel, the good news. It was not something we could do alone. We would need a strong alliance. And we all know that people are willing to share efforts when they know that you're willing to share credit, if there is any. And in those cynical days, we had to convince those we recruited that this was not going to be all about ADF. Our name in the headlines, our face on the networks, our egos being fed. The objective, as John mentioned, was to make stars of others, to hold the umbrella, to embrace those in need of assurance that things are going to be all right. That's right. And from the beginning of ADF in 1993, we made a deliberate effort to do that, and it worked. The alliance grew. People of common cause and faith came together, and we increasingly began to see victory. And by God's grace, as you heard, ADF continues to see them. Now those 14 wins at the Supreme Court in the last 11 years, significant roles with allies, and 60 others. 14 wins at the International Court of Human Rights in Europe, and just 6 months ago, a blowout victory in the Supreme Court of Finland. A ministry that opened its doors with $4,700 in startup cash, now with a budget in the tens of millions. And we've seen our pride and joy, the Blackstone Legal Fellowship, grow to more than 2,400 fellows in 30 nations. But friends, what makes those things sweet is the spirit in which and how this work was accomplished by our God's grace. For ADF, that how and why came down to a handful of principles that had been instilled in me by others, and that I tried in turn to pass along, and that we pray will always remain a central part of the DNA of ADF. The first principle has already been mentioned: making stars of others. Simply put, that means finding ways to make sure those around us are recognized and look good. Recognizing what they do best and encouraging them in that, and observing things they do less well, and graciously helping them and equipping them to do better. It means finding as much joy in their success as we do in our own. And another part of that principle, when we say it's not about us and to make stars of others, is to have an open hand. To always look for ways to have an open hand to tangibly lift up others. And to do this at ADF, we created a grant program that's now provided over 2,000 grants totaling over $15 million to help fund allies and other people that the world would call competitors. We created the Litigation Academy to train and equip allied lawyers, launched the summit to build relationships, develop strategy, and enhance capability, because it's about winning. It's not about us. When one has an open hand to share your blessings with your allies, God can constantly replenish your supplies. You ever notice if you tighten it up, you can't put stuff in it? And it's also, when you also have that open hand, it also keeps you from falling for delusions about your own self-importance, helping you realize how much we must have one another. Thank you, Tom Farr and RFI, for this curriculum, for this free gift you're giving to the world. We're so proud of you and thankful for that. That brings me to the next, shall we say, no-charge principle I'm passing along. We don't have enemies. We have opponents. Our enemy is not an individual. It's an evil greater than any one person or group. As the Apostle Paul noted, our struggle is not with flesh and blood. No matter the intensity, the acrimony, or even the cruelty of that opposition, we make a deliberate choice to not demonize, despise individuals. We do not attack their reputation or besmirch their character. Instead, we offer grace so they would know the love that God has for them. Grace like we saw President Reagan exerting in that example. Years ago, longtime ADF attorney Jordan Lawrence found himself arguing a key case in the California Supreme Court. And Jordan, you know the story. The opposing attorney was deep into her presentation. She began to cough. Jordan, sitting across from her, stood up, poured her a glass of water, stepped across, handed it to her. She drank it, and she wanted to resume her argument, except she couldn't remember where she was. Jordan, while she stood there fumbling, could have left her in an embarrassing place. But Jordan just leaned over and told her where she was. Now, he ended up winning the case profoundly, but he quietly whispered, told her that. It was a small act of kindness, but she remembered it for a long time. And several years later, she wrote me a letter thanking me for the kindness of the people that had opposed her work the most. That's the way it's supposed to work. We want even those trying to destroy us to be able to depend on our word, trust in our character, and know that however sharp our differences, we will look on them with kindness and compassion. As Winston Churchill famously said, in war, resolution. In defeat, defiance. In victory, magnanimity. In peace, goodwill. Someday, dear brothers and sisters, the dust will settle. The battle will be over. We want to be able to look back at what we said, what we did without regret, at peace that we fought the good fight. That doesn't mean we don't fight with all our strength. We fight, as Paul said, not as one who beats the air. Another important thing, as John reported when I was asked to launch ADF, was about the motive for getting into the fray. Are we doing this, I said, to say we tried? Or are we in it to win? Winning, I was told, was the objective. And that perspective gave us great clarity that we wanted to accomplish things in ways that would last. And for 29 years, the ADF team has brought everything it has on the field. Some of you may have read this case. Supreme Court Justice Joseph McKenna, writing in 1935, described the role of a prosecutor. He may prosecute with earnestness and vigor, McKenna said. Indeed, he should do so. But while he may strike hard blows, he is not at liberty to strike foul blows. In defending religious liberty, serving our Lord, we have an even higher duty than that prosecutor in the way we do what we do so that justice will be eloquently performed as was described. Isn't it interesting that the greatest and most decisive battles recorded in Hebrew Scripture, Joshua at Jericho, Gideon against the Midianites, Elijah at Mount Carmel, are remembered as much for how the battle was fought as for the victory itself? I suppose that's not a coincidence. It brings me to another principle that's been especially vital to any success ADF may have had. It was in that theme verse that John mentioned, of John 15:5. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do no thing. As Christians, our ADF team knows we are totally dependent on Christ our Lord for strength, financial sufficiency, for wisdom and discernment, for favor in the courts. Recognizing that dependence means understanding that we cannot accomplish God's purposes in ungodly ways. What's done for his purpose what's done for his purpose but not in his way can only fail. But what's done his way must in time accomplish his purpose. Now, some may feel I'm using a great deal of battle language this evening. I can't really help it, because we are, as Tom said, in a global battle for religious freedom, and the fighting is ramping up everywhere. In the words of C.S. Lewis, there is no neutral ground anywhere in the universe. We are fighting a spiritual war for a better, safer, saner culture. We are fighting for a new birth of freedom, for the souls of our children and our grandchildren and countless strangers all around us. Cultures that preserve religious freedom of their citizens thrive. Those that don't, die. It is the root from which all other freedoms grow. St. John Paul II spoke often of freedom. The church addresses people, he said, with full respect for their freedom. The church proposes, she imposes nothing. She honors the sanctuary of conscience. Sad to say that is not a view shared by all too many of our opponents. By way of contrast, I commend to you again the Reagan example. He used every resource of his office to end Soviet domination and brutality throughout the world. You remember Berlin in 1987, he cried out, "Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Through an extraordinary combination of defense buildups, my favorite was calling the missiles he put in Germany pointed at Moscow the peacekeeper, big stick diplomacy, and the careful cultivation of personal relationships with other world leaders. He, standing with John Paul II, managed what seemed even more impossible then than the overturning of Roe v. Wade did to us just a few months ago. And together, with God's grace, they brought an end to the Soviet Union, the evil empire, and the Cold War. And yet Mr. Reagan, in the moment of victory, said, Mr. Gorbachev deserves most of the credit. Ronald Reagan truly made stars of others, sometimes even his opponents. In victory, magnanimity is our ultimate objective. Is full religious liberty for everyone, everywhere. We must heed John Paul II's reminder that freedom consists not in doing what we would like, but in having the right to do what we ought. That's why how, the way we do what we do, is as important as what we do. And why love suffers long as it kind. Love does not envy. Love is not puffed up. Love does not behave rudely. Love does not rejoice in iniquity. But love rejoices in truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So on behalf of all of those in this room, those across our land and across and around the world tonight who are bearing and believing and hoping and enduring, making in ways great and small their faithful day-to-day eternal difference, and to the Religious Freedom Institute, thank you for this award. Thank you for the blessing, your friendship, and the inspiration of your example. And in closing, we ask the Lord that he will show us the how, the way to gain religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, and that he will let his light flow from us into the darkness. And as we make that prayer, let us recall the words of light that Abraham Lincoln spoke against the national darkness, and it was very dark, in 1861. He said, "The struggle of today is not altogether for today. It is for a vast future also." He continued, "With a reliance on providence, let us proceed in the great task which events have devolved upon us. As we go forth tonight, dear friends, let us proceed to the great tasks before us. And as we engage in those great tasks to which we're called, let us always do it in love, recalling the words of Aquinas, that to love is to will the good of the other." Thank you for your kind attention, and may God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Alan Sears, defender of religious freedom. Alan, thank you for that inspiring talk. Many of you I haven't met tonight. My name is Eric Patterson. You may remember I tried to quiet you down earlier in the night. But I have a few closing remarks, and we're going to bookend them by two quotes from Alan's most recent book about President Eisenhower. The first is this. I think that Alan, in writing this about Eisenhower, was really writing, or we recognize he wrote it about himself. This is the very end of the book. If there is any fitting image to understand a life, it is this. It is a background mingling of colors. Historical moments, activity, choices, words, deeds, all of which were designed to serve to make clearer the outline of the old rugged cross, which was, as he knew, the one and only certain thing of it all. And when I think about Alan, his words, his deeds, his activity, his choices, all rooted in his faith, his love of Christ, to promote religious freedom for everyone. Alan, it wasn't just Eisenhower, it was you. Thank you. And you all heard Alan. He really inspired us with a call to action, that there's things for us to do and there's ways for us to respond to this call for action. And I'd like to challenge you with two of those tonight. The first one is one that Alan mentioned, and that is to pray. I think that sometimes in Washington we forget the spiritual power of prayer, but I can tell you, for those of us at the Religious Freedom Institute, we need your prayers. We have people working full-time on the ground in Iraq, in Lebanon, in London, and of course there's the work here in the United States. We have people traveling all the time to Indonesia today. We need wisdom. We need resources. We need to know what to do, what not to do. And so I ask you to join us in prayer on a regular basis for this work. The second is to give. And let me pause and just say once again our appreciation to the families and the organizations that were sponsors of this event. We couldn't have done it without you. All of us at RFI are grateful for that. And frankly, those people showed us the way. I'm so grateful to them because they took a first step as partners in ministry with us by supporting this event and by inviting all the rest of us. And so I just ask you to consider prayerfully how you would respond to that first step that they took. Would you accept the challenge that perhaps the person who sponsored your table gave as they gave to RFI? And in the days ahead, prayerfully consider how and when to give to RFI. By the way, we'd love to make that easy. If you look on the back of your program, there's one of those cool QR codes that you learned how to use during COVID. It takes you straight to a very useful website. You can also visit the Religious Freedom Institute website. You could send somebody that address that's on the back of the program. The program's key. Take it home. And of course, there's giving envelopes and a whole set of RFI materials free to you in the dessert reception right across the hallway. Well, let me leave you with a charge from Alan. This is straight from his book. This is what he said about Eisenhower, but I think it's something that we should be aspiring to. He said this: Eisenhower's faith was more than mere platitudes or vague beliefs that religion was good for society. His faith compelled him to stand against injustice, to change people's hearts, while also seeking to secure peace. That's the charge to each of us tonight. May we, too, be compelled to stand against injustice, to change people's hearts, and to seek a secure peace. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our program for tonight, but we're not over. There's a wonderful time of fellowship right across the hallway. So don't leave us without more conversation, an opportunity to get to know some more people. Take that program with you. And would you help me as we close tonight, thank Alan Sears one more time.